one question that's come up amongst biologists, particularly evolutionary biologists, is why would sex even evolve? It's so much easier to have asexual reproduction. Just simply make copies of yourself. That's a lot easier. But of course, what happens with sexual reproduction is that in both parents, your chromosomes are shuffled just like a deck of cards, and then they're meted out to the sperm and the eggs pretty randomly. And then eventually it makes you, makes the offspring. And the offspring of one generation is highly variable. So the advantage is thought to be that for selection, there's a lot of variance to select from in different environments. So it's more likely that the population will stick around. However, what's interesting is not the population survival, but selection really works on the individual. So it's still a little bit questionable why sexual selection would arise. But it did. Not sexual selection, sorry, sexual reproduction. So that's what we'd like to talk about today. So there's been lots of theories. It's been clear for a long time, as long as there's been any record, that offspring resembled their parents. But how it came about was unclear, because microscopes hadn't been invented yet back in Greek and Roman days. Do males and females harbor homunculi? Homunculi are forms that are complete. So a human form that is complete. So this is a homunculus. And it was thought for a long time that the sperm carried the entire human form, and that the female would provide the nutrition for that form to grow. Do they mix like paint, like blended? And one big question is, what role do gametes and chromosomes play? And how is it that you are, although somewhat the same as your parents, as all offspring are somewhat the same as their parents, but how come you're also so different? How come you're so different than your siblings? So genetics is the science of heredity. That's what genetics is. And we use all kinds of different animals. So on Thursday, we'll be looking at a study using Drosophila melanogaster. Drosophila melanogaster, which is a model organism for genetics. So, you know, David Suzuki, right? He used this fruit fly, Drosophila, in his studies at UBC. So it was Thomas Hunt Morgan at Columbia University that showed that genes strung on chromosomes are units of heredity. And Morgan won the Nobel Prize for that. What are some other candidates? Like, what else could be inherited from your parents? Could be like proteins. Maybe you just inherited proteins, or carbohydrates, or some kind of lipid, or some other molecule. So there are other candidates. So Morgan narrowed it down with experiments to show that it was actually chromosomes that are the units of inheritance. So there's Morgan. Here's an early fly drawing. So a little red-eyed Drosophila. So people have experimented with the Drosophila for a long time. So genetically, even altering them to look different, different kinds of wings, different colors, different eye colors. They've been extensively used. And one of the reasons for that is that they have, excuse me, they have a very short maturation time. So in a couple of weeks, they'll have their own offspring. So very fast. We know that living organisms reproduce their own kind. The term heredity is the transmission of traits from one generation to the next, and variation is that the offspring differ from an appearance, both from parents and their siblings. Similar, but not the same. So this little guy's leaving home. He learned about heredity that day in school. It's like, I'm out of here. Maybe he thought he was adopted. So the units of heredity, which Mendel called factors, I think, or particles, are genes. They're the units, and they are segments of DNA. So they are sequences of nucleotides. Nucleotides, which is just a molecule with a nitrogenous base. So rings of nitrogen, carbon, oxygen. They're really very simple nucleotides. They have a backbone of a phosphate and a sugar, which is the same for all DNA. But yeah, they're really quite simple when you consider that there really are only 4 different kinds of nucleotides. And they are, do you remember? G, C, A, and T. And they stand for guanine, cytosine, oops, cytosine, adenine, and thymine. Those 4 nucleotides incredibly sequence in varying lengths of DNA and varying combinations or sequences. They contribute to all life forms and all of our various traits, which is amazing to me. And offspring acquire those genes from the chromosomes of their parents. So this is a chromosome, which is condensed DNA. DNA that is not condensed, that's in the cell nucleus, simply loose, is called chromatin. So uncondensed or non-condensed or decondensed, or I'm not sure what the term is. Uncondensed DNA, though, is called chromatin. So here's our condensed chromosome, a section right here, which is the gene. And if you unravel it all, this is the structure of DNA, which is a double helix structure. Probably familiar to you. And of course, they're programmed to synthesize enzymes and proteins. So the proteins provide us with, I'll write that down, proteins. There's so many different proteins. We are a protein-based life form. So our proteins are structural, things like collagen, which we're largely collagen. If you were to boil yourself and then cool the remaining liquid, don't ever do that. It will gellify into a gel, which is collagen, essentially. So they're structural, they're transport, proteins. Other structural ones are myosin and what's the other one? Myosin and the other one that, that are your skeletal proteins. In your muscles, in your skeletal muscles. Transport proteins like hemoglobin is a protein, channel proteins that allow substances to move in and out of the cell. So there's loads of proteins, and enzymes are proteins. Enzymes are proteins, but enzymes are the workaholics of the body, of the life form, because they convert other things and make things. So enzymes convert substances and synthesize and break down substances. And are instrumental in minerals, for example, being made into bone. So all of our inherited traits are as a result of proteins. So we inherit things like freckles and eye color and curly hair and earlobes and skin color. And each gene has a very specific locus. We inherit one set from our mother, one set from our father. So the one set from our father is located in the nucleus of the sperm. So sperm is largely the nucleus with the DNA and a flagellum and a lot of mitochondria for energy. The egg, on the other hand, this is a sperm getting into an egg. And they fuse. The nuclei fuse at fertilization. But there's something else in the egg cell itself. The egg cell also contains mitochondria with its own DNA. Some. That mostly is instrumental in cellular respiration. But that means that you can inherit mitochondrial DNA from your mother, but you don't inherit any mitochondrial DNA from your father. That doesn't get into the cell. So if you were to have a pedigree like that, say, so this is the mother here, the father, and then there's two daughters, and see, two sons, and the female has a specific trait. So some traits that mitochondria code for, you can see there's something that I don't remember the name of, but it causes patchiness of the skin. Patchiness of the skin. Well, if all of the offspring have that trait, males and females, it is very likely that it is a mitochondrial trait. So mitochondrial traits are passed from mother to all offspring. I don't want to write too fast. And my other class is always asking me to slow down. Okay. Can I go on? All right. So here we are in a diagram. Here's the mature human sperm, only 23 chromosomes, not 46, because they've been divided in half by meiosis, which is what we're going to look at today. The egg, 23, fertilized egg, now has 46 chromosomes. A fertilized egg is also known as a zygote. That's the one equalizing fact about every single one of us, is that we were all zygotes at some point in our past. So let's see what asexual reproduction looks like and how much easier that is than sexual reproduction. Well, one parent produces a genetically identical offspring by a completely different process known as mitosis. So today we're going to compare mitosis and meiosis because they're both instrumental in producing offspring, although quite differently. So for example, here's an anemone, and it just reproduces by fission. So it gets so large that for whatever reason, I suppose it's because the large form can't be supported in the water. Maybe it would collapse. I'm not sure. But it gets to a certain size and it just simply splits into the entire organism. This is called budding with the hydra here. This is a hydra. And it just buds off a piece of itself. And when that detaches, it becomes an adult. Asexual reproduction. Daphnia have a really interesting kind of reproduction. And it starts off with parthenogenesis, whereby this is a Daphnia, a female Daphnia. A water flea. So they're very small and they're neat to study because they really are transparent. So these are all eggs that you can see here. Those are all eggs that the female carries. And at first, the female is simply copying her own complete cell, which will develop into a female clone when it divides through mitosis and then hatches. Any differences in the population that comes out of that reproduction, so the offspring, in the offspring, I should say, the offspring that hatch, any differences between those are simply due to mutation. There's no shuffling in asexual reproduction. The offspring get exactly what the parent had genetically, unless there's been some mutation. But in sexual reproduction, two parents give rise to offspring that are unique. They have unique combinations from genes inherited from both parents. So for humans, the probability of getting your particular set of chromosomes from your dad, we said, was 1 in 8 trillion. And from your mom is also 1 in 8 trillion. So you are a probability of 1 in 64 trillion. But of course, that's just about the chromosomes that develop from your parents. There's also all the other probabilities of your parents' survival, your parents meeting, your parents having sex, which they did, even though you don't like to think about that. And there's a lot of chance involved in you and I being here, that's for sure. So these are bulldogs, and they're all siblings, but they're all a little bit different. They're kind of cute in a bulldog kind of way. This one has an eye patch. This one's light brown. This one is really dark with some mottling. This one is white. So there's a lot of variation in fur color. And also don't forget that variation is of external and internal traits. We often don't think about that, but internally, of course, all organisms have viscera, and so like heart and kidneys and liver, and we also inherit those traits, of course, from our parents. So there are different kinds of life cycles. A life cycle goes from egg to egg, essentially. That's your life cycle. You were an egg once, and then you're going to go through your life, and eventually you'll produce another zygote, an egg and a sperm. So, yeah. It's a generation to generation sequence of stages in the reproductive history of an organism. So if you were looking at humans, you would be looking at stages, including stage of maturation, which is when humans can have offspring, would be age, depends where you are in the world, I think 12, 15 would be the first possibilities of having offspring. So in humans, we have 46 chromosomes made up of 2 sets, 1 set from each parent. And we can look at that set in what's known as a karyotype. So this is a karyotype, which is a visual representation of chromosomes in a cell. So there's a little bit of terminology to think about. Well, first of all, though, what do you notice about this karyotype? How does it seem to be ordered? Does it have any pattern?
According to size?
According to size, yeah, it goes from large to small. And that's just a convenient way of doing it. So the largest one is chromosome 1, and the smallest ones are chromosomes 19. So these are 23 pairs of homologous chromosomes. And remember, homologous chromosomes code for the same characters, but each chromosome may have a different version of that character. So we were drawing this before. You know, this chromosome might, for example, might have one allele for brown eye color, one for blue eye color. But all the chromosomes have DNA for different traits. And all of these chromosomes are somatic. No, sorry, that's not what they call them. I think they do, but collectively, I think they're known as autosomes. Yeah, autosomes. So there's only one pair that are sex chromosomes, X and Y. And the Y chromosome, interestingly, is getting smaller over time for whatever reason. And the Y chromosome has one gene called the SRY. The sex determining region of the Y chromosome is what that stands for. And that confers maleness at, for humans, about 8 weeks old. So that gene, how does it work? It codes for the release of testosterone. I'm not sure which order this goes in, but it codes for testosterone, the development of the testes, and then the individual becomes male. If there are no hormones like testosterone, then the embryo becomes female. So female is the default. And at 8 weeks, if that SRY gene is there, then the embryo will become male. And it's not the same for all animals. There are lots of different versions of male, female in different animals. So it's important to know that homologous chromosomes are two chromosomes composing a pair. Same characteristics, different versions. Allele A here, the light blue one, is different than allele B. So these two chromosomes that are exactly the same have been copied, and at this point they're called sister chromatids. These two are sister chromatids. Sister chromatids. But this chromosome is homologous to this one. So they're homologous. But when they go through meiosis, all of the DNA gets copied. So sex chromosomes are distinct from each other in their characteristics. For humans, represented by X and Y, of course, the female is XX and the XY is male. However, a few things can happen and do happen sometimes in meiosis, which is mutations. Sorry, X, Y. So an individual can be XY, but the SRY gene is missing. Therefore, the individual will be female, although there's an XY combination. And it is possible for there to be two X chromosomes and the SRY gene has somehow been inserted into the X chromosome. That is also possible. Not terribly not terribly likely, but it is possible. It is possible also for one X chromosome to be inherited and no other one. So sometimes during meiosis, there's an anomaly known as non-disjunction, where the chromosomes don't get separated. So X, and then there's nothing there. So some terminology I'm not sure if we used yet, but diploid has two sets of each chromosome. So you and I are diploid individuals because all of our cells have two sets. So the only haploids in our bodies are our eggs and our sperm. They're the only haploids. So 2n is 46. After meiosis, eggs and sperm have half the chromosomes of the cell from whence they came, and therefore are called haploid. But in nature, there are some organisms that are haploids as adults. Mosses, for example. You look out at a moss, it looks very much like any other plant, but what you're looking at are haploids. So the diploid part is just when they grow this teeny little stalk, and that's the diploid stalk. So when a DNA synthesis has occurred, all the chromosomes are duplicated, and each consists of two identical sister chromatids. Yeah. So in this case, the key here is the red is the maternal, blue are the paternal set, and they've been duplicated. So these are identical sister chromatids here. They're attached by an area known as the centromere. So in the human life cycle, at sexual maturity, which is, gosh, it depends where you are. I think 12 is the youngest, somewhere between 12 and 15 years of age for humans. Then then a human is going through puberty, and it's not until then that the testes produce haploid gametes by meiosis. The ovaries, in the case of humans, have already developed by the time the individual is born. But unlike the somatic cells, those are the cells in the rest of your body other than sperm and eggs, sperm and egg cells are haploid. They only have half the number of chromosomes. Yeah, so during fertilization, they fuse and they form a diploid zygote. And it's that zygote that develops into an adult organism. So I'm not going to go through all the stages of human development. I just wanted to show you the cycle. So here's a haploid egg, a haploid sperm, fertilization, a diploid. Let's see, let's do that in a different color. A diploid zygote 2N. And then for the rest of the individual's life, all cells except the cells that will become eggs or sperm, so except gametes, which is the collective term for eggs or sperm, are diploid in the adult. That's for humans. And it's not until cells in the ovary and the testes go through meiosis that we go back to haploids. So there is a variety in sexual life cycles. It differs in the timing of meiosis and fertilization. For the most part, let me show you a couple. Well, in animals, meiosis occurs during gamete formation. So with humans, that happens in the testes and the ovaries. So that's when meiosis occurs. Here's a diploid multicellular organism and the zygote, which goes through meiosis at some stage, and then gametes are formed. In plants and some algae, though, they exhibit what's known as an alternation of generations. So the life cycle of multicellularity includes both diploid and haploid multicellular stages, not unicellular, but multicellular. So with plants, the multicellular, or sorry, the multicellular diploid is called a sporophyte. That individual will make spores through meiosis. So it goes through meiosis, makes some spores that go through mitosis. So you have a haploid multicellular organism, which is known as a gametophyte. Haploid cells. That make up the gametophyte. So the example that that we gave was mosses. That's a good example. And ferns also have a stage where they have a multicellular gametophyte. So, and that's because mosses are the first plant to move onto land, and ferns came along after that. So then the gametophyte, there will be a female and a male gametophyte that will produce little gametes that will fertilize and form a zygote. So these are going to be sperm and an egg. And fungi and protists, meiosis produces haploid cells that give rise to a haploid multicellular adult organism. And that cell carries out mitosis, and it produces cells that will become gametes in that case. So a little bit different. So what is important about meiosis is that it reduces, reduces the number of chromosomes from diploid to haploid. And it takes place in two divisions, meiosis 1 and meiosis 2. And I'm going to stop there so that I can show you in a video how that works. Thank you for watching.